Welcome to Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to the people shaping the cybersecurity landscape today and find out a bit about their journey, the events that have shaped their career, and the problems that still keep them awake at night. Today's guest is Michael Perklin, an information security professional who's been working with Bitcoin, blockchains, decentralized systems since 2010. Among his numerous contributions to industry, he has founded the Cryptocurrency Certification Consortium, otherwise known as C4, secured the launch of Ethereum's initial coin offering, drafted the crypto security standard CCSS, and provided expert witness testimony that's helped put cyber criminals behind bars. Michael has also served on the boards of the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada and the Bitcoin Foundation, and was Chief Information Security Officer of ShapeShift for 5 years, helping them decentralize into a decentralized autonomous organization, DAO. Michael, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, James.
Now, I'm going to be upfront at the start of this that I'm quite concerned that they're going to take my nerd credentials away because I'm not an expert in cryptocurrency or blockchains. You rightly already, before we did this thing, called me out and said it's not blockchain, it's blockchains. So as we go through this, audience, please bear with me because I'm not the expert that Michael is. So speaking of Michael and your expertise there, how did you first become interested in technology? Because obviously I assume you weren't born and immediately drawn towards cryptocurrency and blockchains.
Definitely not. No. From a young child, I was always interested in tech. It's the standard story that I'm sure most of your listeners have. Tinkering with this, ripping apart a toy, having their parent yell at them because now they broke the toy, and then suddenly putting it all back together again with a renewed knowledge of how it actually works inside. I was blessed by having a father who recognized this and fueled it as I was growing up, getting me a computer at a young age, getting me programming books. In high school, I was hacking around with computers, building little programs that did things, changed my grades, got in trouble. And I didn't really know exactly where my path was going, other than I knew that it involved computers. And at first it was building computers and hardware, then it was programming computers and software. And after I'd graduated with a degree in computer science and I was out in the field working, I got a phone call that would forever change my life. It was one of my old professors who taught me operating systems design in my computer science program, Victor Alovich, rest in peace. Victor called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, Michael, I remember when I was teaching you, you were always very interested in the security aspect of computer science. And I want you to know that I've started a brand new program that is focusing solely on computer security. Because you had an interest, maybe you would consider coming back to school." Now, I had the impression at the time that he was working through a call list of every one of his previous students, just trying to get any of them to sign up because he needs to put butts in the seats. He's building a new program. He wants students to teach to justify that the program can continue. As I was thinking about it, I'm there at work, earning money doing software testing. And now I'm considering going back to school for computer security. Then I thought back to the time when I changed my grades and I was early. And then the time when I took apart this thing and put it back together and made it do something different. And I realized that when it came to computers, the thing that I found the most fascinating was the concept of the digital locks that keep people out and how to circumvent them to get in anyways, to reprogram the thing to allow you to do something that you shouldn't be able to do, but you figured it out anyways. That kind of thing drew me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Computer security was always the thing I was interested in, and I didn't really know it until I was about 26 years old, and I got that phone call from my old professor. I jumped into the program, graduated, and got a job doing digital forensic investigations. I was a computer examiner. I would, pull deleted emails off of a hard drive, present it to a lawyer so that they can prove that the husband was cheating on the wife. And that would be useful in whatever court divorce proceedings, or, find a copy of the customer list that the VP took right before he quit so that he can start a competing business. All my clients at the time were lawyers, and it was various breaches or various legal proceedings that I would assist in until I heard about Bitcoin. First time I heard about it, I discounted it as yet another scam that somebody's doing online. It's bullshit. Can I say that on your show? I'm sorry. Well, you're muted. I'm going to just assume you said, yes, I love that word. So great. It came up again. Now, at the time, Slashdot was very prominent in the nerd world, and people were taking this somewhat seriously, like it was something that should really be looked at as an important innovation. Now, I had a background in cryptography, in computer science, in programming, in digital message digests or hashes, and I knew how all of the pieces worked. So, you know what? To make a little bit of a name for myself, I'm going to research this Bitcoin scam, figure out exactly how it is a scam, write a nice little blog post or article that will go up on Slashdot and show the world, this is why you should avoid this scam. And so I started digging, and I started attacking Bitcoin from this direction and attacking Bitcoin from this direction and this one, and really trying to understand it so that I could prove why it was a scam. And then I still remember the day. It was, I think, November 27th, 2010. I was sitting at my dining room table, and I had just done one other test with it to confirm how it's working. And it hit me again like a ton of bricks, just like that call from Victor in 2008 or whatever it was. Bitcoin wasn't the stupidest thing I'd heard of. Bitcoin was the most brilliant thing that I'd ever laid my eyes upon. And from that moment, I was hooked. I said, well, if I'm realizing this now, the world is going to realize this tomorrow. I need to do whatever I can to work with this technology. It's like dealing with iPhones and building iPhone apps when the first iPhone came out, or building web pages when the internet first went online. Now there's this new technology that instead of sending voice over IP or data over IP, it's sending value over IP. I can blink my fingers and transport money to the other side of the globe without any middleman saying no, without PayPal saying, sorry, your funds are frozen until you do all the, this is fire. And I want to learn how to play with it. I want to learn how to harness it. So I opened the world's first Bitcoin security consultancy that I thought I was clever in calling Bitcoin Sultants, a portmanteau of Bitcoin and consultants. Now, part of me regrets naming it that, but that launched my career and sort of brought me to where I am today.
Well, that's fascinating that you had this perfect storm, the perfect combination of the right interests, the right background, the right knowledge. You'd been kind of in the security and forensic space, I know plenty of people. I come from a digital forensics background who spent many an hour carving out, trying to track down adulterous wives or husbands in NCASE and things like this. And then, get more interested in, what are the other challenges out there that I can solve? I'm tired of running reports. I want to get stuck in something. So you clearly were at the right place, the right time there. And traditionally, a lot of people think of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and things as often it's like the Wild West. There's very few rules and there's this rush for gold. But you clearly felt there was a need to bring some security and order to the chaos and provide those security and investigation services. What was the motivation to go down that route and do that consultancy practice rather than, chasing down your own coin offering or some of the other things that other routes that people took with cryptocurrency?
After working in the digital forensic world and doing digital investigations, I found myself at Rogers Communications, which is one of the largest telecoms in Canada. If not the largest, I don't know exactly how it ranks, but I was in their corporate investigations group, and I was just constantly either investigating crimes by the employees or by the customers, or doing audits and following audit checklists and audit specifications, whether it was the ISO 27001 standard, or it was the PCI standard, or it was one of the myriad standards that a large telecom needs to follow or chooses to follow. When I started dealing with the blockchain space, I realized that there was no formality to it at all. It was just a bunch of ECDSA public and private keys, a bunch of nodes with the equivalent of a distributed hash table, passing blocks around to keep everybody in check and make sure that nobody's lying. And when I started doing one of my first Bitcoin security engagements, I was helping an exchange secure their funds. I found myself almost at a loss for what to do. I knew computer security. I knew I nearly a decade of work experience working with this stuff, but I found myself floundering because there wasn't a checklist that I would follow. I would, follow the ISO 27001 checklist or the PCI checklist or whatever the checklist is. But when it came to Bitcoin security, everybody was doing it differently. Now, this company over here, Kraken, did it very well. That company over there, MT Gox, fell flat on their face because they had really terrible security. And it became clear to me that everybody was trying to do security differently because there was no standard for doing it properly like there was in the traditional cybersecurity world. And I saw a need there that I could fill. And that was one of the reasons why C4 was started, the Cryptocurrency Certification Consortium. It's a mouthful. C4 is a lot easier to say. That nonprofit was created for two purposes, to help educate the world about cryptocurrencies and also to help standardize things that need standardization. Under that banner, I contacted the security officers of every exchange that existed back in 2012. It was 2014. And we collaborated. We said, okay, so here are the 30 hacks that we know of these 30 systems. What was the root cause of this? What was the root cause of this? And then we started to divide it into columns of things. Okay, so this was an issue in the key generation process. The software generated a key incorrectly that was actually guessable. All right, so you need to create the key correctly. Oh, well, this one is a key storage issue. They didn't encrypt it properly. The decryption key was on the same system, which made it easy for an attacker to decrypt it. So they weren't storing it properly. After they moved to a different system, they didn't scrub it properly from the old system, allowing someone to dumpster dive and pull it out of the garbage. Once it was all laid out, it seemed almost obvious from cradle to grave how a key is born, how it is used, how it is stored, how it is destroyed. And then an information system is more than just the tech. Sure, there's the hardware and the software that you're using, but there are the policies in place for how things should be done, the procedures in place for how things are done, and then the training of the staff for how they do those things. All 5 of those things make up an information system. So the CCSS laid all of this out, and the first version of it had 33 different controls that need to be in place in order to adequately protect cryptocurrency. Now I think it's 37 controls. It's a living and breathing standard. Since it was first launched in 2014, it's been updated every year since. Now here we are nearly 10 years later. It's not only my go-to whenever I'm beginning a new security engagement, but many other exchanges have adopted it as part of their own as well. And they proudly display on their website that we are compliant with CCSS level 1, or we are certified by this external auditor as CCSS level 3. I found a lot of joy in taking my previous knowledge of formal audits from the telecom world and applying it to this Wild West that you spoke of, to sort of bring a little bit of order to chaos in not only my life, but a industry that will long survive me.
I think what really interested me when I was doing the research for this, I came across a quote from you talking about, I think it was in quite the early days of you getting involved in this thing, that you'd been looking at, I think it was an exchange, and there was one person who had the passwords the company's holding. There was no contingency plan in place should they been able to access them, if they were incapacitated, kidnapped, or just passed away simply. And I think the quote from you was, my jaw kept on dropping to the point where it couldn't have dropped anymore. So clearly, you were really horrified by some of the early practices that were going on in the industry. Are there any particular standout ones for you that you just think, I don't know why anyone thought that was a good idea?
Yeah, good question. Definitely, there have been a lot of jaw-dropping things. So one of the features of cryptocurrencies is the ability to have multiple signatures on something, multiple signatories, so that many people need to agree to move funds rather than one person. It would stand to reason that you would want all those separate people to be, well, separate people. There are cases where when you look at the evidence on chain, when you're looking at the data on the blockchain, you can see that there are 5 keys in use and 3 out of the 5 signers need to agree. But when you actually start talking to the company, you realize that all of those 5 keys are on one USB drive and they're all controlled by one dude. And when it comes time to sign something, he plugs in that USB stick to his online machine that could be riddled with malware and be reading that USB stick and transmitting those contents up to God knows where. He plugs it into his online machine and he signs with the first key. Today I'm going to sign with the 3rd key and the 5th key. Let's go odd today. And that's not multi-signature technology. That's not it's not even going with the spirit of, let alone the letter of the law there. That was probably one of the most horrifying things that I've seen in one of my audits. And the only thing more horrifying than that is when I called it out in the first meeting after the findings to give recommendations on improving. They thought that was fine, and they didn't understand why I was making such a big point about having different actors, different humans behind each of these keys. And their proposed solution was to take the files off of the USB stick, give one to John, one to Julie, and one to Joe. And now we've got 5 people. But it's like, well, no, because you could have still kept the original. Like, you got to make new ones, guys. These types of things are obvious to security professionals, but not necessarily obvious to people who like to pretend as that they know what they're doing.
And in those early days, was it just that people were just very enthusiastic and they were chasing down the money, they were trying to seize an opportunity, and they were taking shortcuts, and they thought at some point we'll retrofit security? Or was it just that they just weren't aware that such practices were insecure to begin with?
It's a mixed bag. I've seen both. I've seen people who just didn't know better and they were doing the best that they could. Those are actually the best ones. It's the others who actually do know better, but they choose to make a shortcut here because, well, marketing gave us the arbitrary launch deadline of tomorrow, so we got to get it out the door. So let's just cut all these corners. Or the engineers who look at security as if it is salt in a meal. All right, now that the meal is done, let's just sprinkle on a little bit of security and call it a day. Well, no, if you want it to actually be secure, you need to bake it with security in from day one. Otherwise, you have to rewrite the entire thing. You can't just add security on like it's salt on a meal.
And in those initial engagements you were doing when you kind of founded your security company and went into this area of consultancy, what were the typical engagements you were doing? Was it with the exchanges? Was it with individuals who'd lost crypto? Was it with businesses who just didn't understand it at all and were trying to get a feel for where their place in the market was?
Great question. It was, again, a mixed bag. At the time, everything was coordinated on one forum, the bitcoin.org forum, which has now been renamed to bitcointalk.org. So there would be somebody saying, hey, I'm building a Bitcoin gambling site and I need help in making sure that it's secure. So, reach out and help them out a little bit. It would be exchanges saying, yeah, we want to beef up our security before a hack. Or, God forbid, it would be incident response. Hey, we were just hacked. We need to call you in for remediation. Sometimes it was large holders, people who, through one means or another, managed to collect a large stash of these Bitcoins, and they wanted to make sure that it was very difficult for them to lose them. They wanted me to train them on how to use these private keys properly so that they would never accidentally expose it to malware and lose their funds. So yeah, everywhere from individuals to large corporations to people being preppers, to people running around with their hair on fire, doing incident response. It was a mixed bag of it all.
And how drastically different? So if you're doing incident response in the world of Bitcoin, how different is that to the sort of incident response and forensic response that you'd been doing in your previous role?
Not that different at all. At the end of the day, a computer system is a computer system. There's an operating system on there. There might be a couple of applications. All of them might have some CVEs that are known or some vulnerabilities that are not known. In classical times, in the pre-blockchain world, people would break into a server and steal data. In the post-blockchain world, people break into a server and they're still stealing data, but that data is now a private key that can unlock untold amounts of wealth on the Bitcoin blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, or whichever other blockchain that key that key connects with. Probably one of the most interesting ones that I worked on would have been the launch of Ethereum. At the time, every single new cryptocurrency was just a copy paste of Bitcoin. They would copy it, tweak a parameter or two, give it a new name, give it a new logo, and say it's a brand new cryptocurrency. So I usually avoided all of these with a plague. But Ethereum was different. This guy who had created the idea, he had tried to build new advanced programming layers into Bitcoin. So that in addition to transferring value over vast distances with Bitcoin, you could also make a decentralized smart contract so that two people can agree on something and put that agreement in code rather than in the written word enforced by a lawyer. It would be enforced by the laws of a computer program. But instead of uploading it to a server, which could go offline or be otherwise interrupted, this would go on a decentralized network, on the Bitcoin network, so that it can't be taken offline and everybody can see exactly how it runs. And you don't need to look at the source code because you can see the actual code on the chain. All the other developers were like, no, buddy, you're not going to add all this other stuff onto Bitcoin. So he said, okay, well, then I'm just going to build my own blockchain. I didn't really want to get involved too much with this new blockchain he was creating, this Ethereum blockchain, but I knew that they intended on raising a lot of Bitcoin. So I said, hey, listen, I'll secure all the Bitcoin you're raising. I'll help you with the portal that you use so people send their Bitcoin in, and then they get an Ethereum key so that in the future they'll have access to their Ether. I'll just deal with the Bitcoin stuff. And that vault was a lot of fun to build. It's all been open source now. But at the time, it was pretty hush-hush. It was a 2 of 3 of 3 setup. So a classical 2 of 3 for the sites. There was Toronto, London, and Germany. Within these 3 sites, there were 3 operators. 3 people in Toronto. 2 of 3 of them would need to sign on behalf of Toronto. 2 of 3 in London need to sign on behalf of London. And as long as you would get 4 of those 9 people signing, then the transaction would go through. Now, at the time, there were no multi-sig wallets. So all of this was done with command line applications. And there were no, seed words, 24 English language mnemonic words for your private key to make it easy to back up. Everything was long hexadecimal strings. So these operators needed to be trained on how to use these footballs. I actually kept one. It's right here.
So this is football as in the nuclear football sense?
That's right. This here was a development board that helped to launch Ethereum. It's a small little Beagle Board, an open source piece of hardware, and it would run all the cryptography on it. And there was one of these at each of the 3 sites. And operators would plug in a monitor and type a bunch of stuff on there. So I put together not only the software that ran on these, but a pretty thick manual for how to use it, what all the commands were, and a disaster recovery plan so that if, God forbid, one of the operators were to disappear, be kidnapped, or to take one of these devices hostage, which did happen, what should the other sites do to remove that vulnerability from the system to protect Ethereum's Bitcoin. In the end, I think they raised something like 30,000 Bitcoin or more, and not a single Satoshi was lost. So I'm pretty proud of that one.
That's fantastic, and definitely something to be proud of there. I've got to ask, because you mentioned it, someone took one of the boards hostage. How did that work, and how did the contingency plan kick in and work around that?
This individual had access to the football at one of the 3 sites and decided that they deserve more money. So they said that they moved it temporarily. I'm sure I just moved it to my home. I'll move it back to where it belongs. But in the meantime, also, there are these invoices that I'm still waiting to get paid. Hopefully these can get paid soon, but don't worry, the football is safe. I'll move it back to the shared location as soon as I can. I looked at this, and this seemed pretty clear that the person was now compromised, or at least was working in opposition to the agreed upon system that all 9 of these people had agreed on. So the emergency system was invoked, and the other signers on the other 2.
Well, speaking of insider threats, that's probably a good point to ask you how you first became involved in ShapeShift, because I believe that's quite an interesting investigation and story there. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you became involved.
Yeah, it's a great story. If any of your readers want to read it in long form, I recommend they use their favorite search engine to look for Looting of the Fox. It's a story written by Eric Voorhees, the CEO of ShapeShift at the time. So I woke up one Saturday morning to a flood of Skype messages, a flood of Telegram messages, missed phone calls, and I didn't really know what was going on. All of them from, or all the phone numbers I didn't recognize, but the messages were from Eric Voorhees saying, "Hey, I need help." Backtracking a week or 2 prior, there was a message from ShapeShift saying that they suffered a loss of funds, but everything will be on track soon. I had reached out to Eric saying, "Hey, I met you at one of the conferences. We sat across from each other at the Texas Bitcoin conference at the speaker dinner. I'm the security guy who got up on stage and was talking about like security standards. If you need help with this apparent loss of funds, let me know." And he said, "No, we got it covered. All's fine." Fast forward a week later, I wake up to all these messages, and it apparently had happened again. This was, I think, the second or the third time that they had lost funds in the matter of 2 weeks. And they didn't know where it was coming from. They didn't know what was going on. But he needed help. And I said, "Okay, well, what's your timeline?" He's like, "Well, can you be here later today?" So in those days, I always kept a go bag with changes of clothes and toiletries and everything. So I looked at the go bag and it was ready, and I said, "Okay, I'm a little bit hungover from my Friday night last night, but I'm going to get on a plane and hopefully I'll see you right as rain on the other side." Over the next week, I worked with the team there with the assistance of one very bright individual as well, named Luke. We worked together to identify a lot of digital fingerprints that were left by the attacker. Some logs were manipulated and entries were deleted from logs that ended up proving very helpful. We found persistence. They had loaded additional system kernel files on some of these systems so that they could guarantee future access. And it was clear that they were using SSH credentials that were authorized to access the box. It was an insider. It was one of their employees. It was specifically the administrator who was hired to help run and secure all of their systems. He had stopped showing up to work, and he wasn't coming in to help with the theft. Ultimately, the reason why became pretty clear. One interesting thing about that investigation is there's a situation where, and I don't remember exactly how it came about, but we needed a little bit more information to help nail things down and provide all of the relevant knowledge to the FBI. And we had a pretty clear idea of how they got into the system and how they manipulated things. But we needed a little bit more information to be able to give a complete report, I guess, to the authorities. Somehow, Rovion, that is the name of the attacker, started up a conversation with Eric. I don't remember if it was on Skype. I think it was on Skype. Doesn't matter. But he said, well, I'm the hacker. And I'm like, well, prove it. And he gave a file path to the system kernel extension that he had loaded to persist his access. Now, this file path, this is what was deleted from the logs. When that was loaded, he deleted it from the system log, showing that it wasn't loaded at all. But we were able to recover an older version of the log that still had those lines. So we had already known that that was where the remote access Trojan was hiding. So we knew that it was him because just knowing this location on that file system, you had to have been the attacker to know that. And then Eric asked the guy for some information, and the guy said, well, you're going to have to give me a Bitcoin. And if you give me a Bitcoin, I'll give you that information. And then just in the room with all the people there, as everyone was talking, like weighing the value of the information, weighing the value of a Bitcoin, which at the time was only, I think, something like 300, 500. I don't even remember what it was, but insignificant compared to today's 70,000 or more. And it was deemed to be more valuable to get that information. So Eric sent the attacker more Bitcoin, and we got that information, and that was all helpful in filing what was filed with the authorities.
I believe the IT administrator who's named in the media as Bob. Did it just disappear? He even left his own dog behind when he fled. Was he ever tracked down and apprehended because of these investigation?
He definitely was a piece of work. Anybody to leave their own dog, to value money over a life, it just shows you where their priorities are. I'd rather not talk about some of the outcomes for that individual because there's still some things to come.
No problem at all. And in terms of ShapeShift, that was the beginning of your involvement, but you went on to become CISO at ShapeShift. So how did that come about, and how did you find being in that role?
Yeah. So as I said, I spent about a week with the team there, and I really started to like the team. I met Emily, who was in charge of their communications, and she was a rock star. I met Megan, who was in charge of their customer support. She was a rock star. I met Matt and John, and they were in charge of engineering, and they were both rock stars in their own right. And I looked around the room, and all of them were incredibly intelligent people, all building towards a mission. And of course, Eric and John ShapeShift, the two of them, the way that they managed the team and include everybody together, I looked at them with a lot of awe. And as Eric was driving me to the airport, I told him, you've got a great team pulled together. It sucks that you guys lost $300,000. But one of the reasons for it is you don't have anybody who's focused on security. You've got all these people, but you don't have a security person. You need a dedicated security professional working alongside these team members to make sure that they continue to build securely. And he looks at me and he's like, well, why isn't that you? He's like, well, no, Eric, I'm flying back home to Toronto. Your team is here in Denver. You need someone local. Okay, well, why isn't that you? So he continued to chase me over the next couple of months. And I never even considered leaving my home. I'd grown up in the Toronto area my entire life. I'd only ever lived in the Toronto area. And it was strange to even contemplate, flying over an invisible line to live in another country. But ultimately, the opportunity of working alongside those bright stars is what attracted me the most. I knew that, sure, I would learn a lot being a hired gun. Every week is a different system, a different crew, a different problem, a different puzzle to solve. But working alongside this tight-knit team of rock stars, I would learn a hell of a lot more, and it would challenge me a lot more than the new puzzle of the week, which is what I'd been doing for the last 10 years with digital investigations. So I took the plunge and I became their CISO. Built their security policy from nothing. Built their security training to help train every individual that joined on secure practices. And from then on, I'd say I started the best 6 years of my life.
That's fantastic, and I mean, it's a very nice pitch to be given, isn't it? That why aren't you working here, as opposed to a more traditional interview process? So it's fantastic that you all gelled like that, and there was the mutual respect and need to bring those things together. And when you went into that role as CISO, you continued to do your work, you continued to improve their security, but this time you dealt with an insider threat from the inside, from the defensive side, actually. And there's an employee who I believe had differing beliefs, who owned some of the Bitcoin reserves, and you had to end up laying a trap and using your skills to actually identify the rogue employee. So maybe you could just briefly tell us a little bit about that journey. Yeah,
a little bit of that has been made public through the court filings. But an employee who had a different belief on the ownership of the Bitcoins is a polite way of putting it. It's more accurate that he stole money. This one was heart crushing, because this tight knit group of 6 people. It was 12 when I joined, and at the time that we identified this attack, we had maybe 100 people working at ShapeShift. And it was right before a long weekend. I got a phone call from someone on finance. And this is during the pandemic, so everybody's working from home. And I was just finishing packing the car on my Thursday afternoon to drive into the mountains for a weekend getaway with some friends. And I get the call saying, we've found evidence that we've lost at least 500,000. We're still tallying it. Could be more. But it's clear that some of our money is gone. Some of our money is missing. And we didn't know at the time on that Thursday afternoon whether it was an outside attacker that breached our systems and stole funds, or an inside attacker who took things. And obviously I was really looking forward to that weekend getaway with friends. But when duty calls, I picked up the phone and told everybody, got to cancel it. Everybody stay home. Like, this is not happening anymore. Sorry. Talk to you later. I need to deal with work. And for that entire weekend was it was a very intense investigation. And we didn't know who to trust, because we didn't know if it was somebody from the inside or the outside. So those finance people are the only ones that really knew. And then there was myself. I called the CEO who was driving at the time, and he had flaky reception and he couldn't really hear me. He was like, well, what are you saying? We were robbed. And it's like, what? Well, what do you, and it's all broken up. And it's like, don't worry, I'm on it. And then I'm not sure if my words even got through. It was, in hindsight, a lot of that investigation was thrilling. It was late nights, going to bed at 3, 4 in the morning, waking up really early, gathering information and just trying to put it together as a logic puzzle. This plus this is that, this cannot mean that. How can we prove that it is totally not this guy? Can we prove that it is totally not this guy? Because if we can, then I can bring him in and I could really use his help on some of this stuff. There was we identified that the theft had been ongoing, almost like that Superman 4 plot, where a little drip and drab will come out every day, and hopefully it won't be noticed amongst all the float. Well, we identified that all this started a couple of months prior, and we hired a relatively new engineer who had been given access to a lot of systems, and they were hired well after this all started. So we knew that this started before this guy. So at the very least, I can trust this guy. So get on a call with them, and it's like, hey, I know it's a long weekend, but I need your help, and there's a theft, and can you help me investigate? This ragtag group of employees slowly grew by one. We had a prime suspect, and we did lay a trap. We made a change to a system that would not be noticed by anybody except for the attacker. And sure enough, within like 10 minutes on our internal Slack, an employee says, hey, has anybody made any changes to that system? And right there, it was like, okay, it's you. The rest of the weekend was spent building a personality profile. What is important to this individual? What is not important to this individual? Because we're going to have to confront them. And when we confront them, we want to make sure that confrontation will result in acquiescence, an agreement to repay the funds. We hired a private investigator who sat outside their door and watched them for the rest of the weekend as they went to their friend's house and moved around in their car with instruction, follow them no matter where they go. If they suddenly leave the state, we need to keep an eye on this guy because we know that he is the one who stole nearly $1 million. We had a total tally at the time. It was like 950,000 or something like that. We confronted him on the first day of work. He thought he was joining a team meeting, and he was greeted by the chief legal officer and the chief security officer. And if there's ever a pair of people that you don't want to be in the room alone with, is the chief legal officer and the chief security officer of your company. And as soon as he joined, we hit send on an email. So something was waiting in his inbox, and it's like, hey, before you disconnect, just know that everything we're about to tell you has already been delivered to your inbox. So if you do accidentally disconnect, you can read what we're going to be talking about here. You have until noon to return funds. How you behave next is going to dictate how you live the rest of your life. Either a combination of in jail or looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life, or with the knowledge that, yeah, you may have screwed up in your youth, but you accounted for it, and you can at least move forward in freedom. How do you want to play this? I mean, that was an abridged version of it, but he chose correctly. He chose to return the funds. And I actually saw a little bit of myself in this kid. I mentioned towards the beginning of this podcast that I had changed my grades in the past. That's not the only bad thing that I'd done in my past. I think everybody in the security world, in the process of testing the boundaries of the security of a system, sometimes pushes it a little bit too far. But you learn from that. You learn what is right and wrong by testing those boundaries. I mean, boundaries, right and wrong, don't exist without that boundary between them. And unless you test where that boundary is, you don't fully appreciate where everything lands. I had someone take me under their wing in my early days when they saw that I was doing bad things and said, hey, listen, you clearly are, you have a lot of knowledge, a lot of skills in doing these types of things, but how you use them is up to you, and it can totally change your future. Do you want to use them right, or do you want to use them wrong? Do you want to be in jail, or do you want to be putting the guys in jail? And that did have an impact on me, that somebody recognized my abilities and just pointed them in the right direction. And here was this young kid who very clearly had skills. He hid things quite well. But at the end of the day, blockchains are public. Every single transaction that ever occurs is visible for all time. And if you made a mistake on a blockchain 10 years ago, that evidence will never be deleted. So it was easy to add up exactly how much he had stolen and confront him with it. And I don't know what he's doing these days, but I'm happy that he did return the funds. Building trust can take a very long time, but removing trust can happen in an instant.
It must have been, with such a small team and such a high amount of trust within the organization, it must have been very emotionally draining for the entire team. Obviously you're working the long hours, you're doing the investigation, you're slowly working out who you can trust. But to be in a position where there's no obvious suspect because you all trust each other in the organization, what was there a kind of a longer term impact on the trust? Did you have to change security practices because of that incident?
There was a longer term impact. The CEO called an all hands meeting and told everybody that this employee stole from us, and that's why they are no longer with the company. And the entire company almost went through a little bit of a mourning period and started wrestling with the decision that was before ShapeShift, because the leadership didn't really know exactly how to play it, go left or go right, and asked the employees for their input. Do you let him go because he's young, he's learned his lesson, he's repaid everything, we've been made whole, or do you throw the book at him? But if you throw the book at him, he may go to jail, rightfully so, he committed a crime, but that means that for the rest of his life, he will be paying for the mistake he made in his youth. Is it worth ruining the future of a very bright individual for a mistake? Well, at what point do you decide to go left or right there? And there's valid arguments for letting him off because he admitted to it and he gave it back. There's valid arguments to be made for reporting it and putting it on the books so that any future employer knows who they're about to hire. They're hiring somebody who was willing to steal from their previous employer. Ultimately, it was sort of a half measure. A lawsuit was filed and then settled immediately so that court records were recorded in these public records. So if anybody ever does look at this individual, they will see the evidence of it and they will see that he did steal and he did pay it back. And honesty is the best policy for everything. I was honest with Eric that, I had a shady past, but I learned from it and it made me who I am. And the integrity that I hold myself to is because of all those things that I did in the past. And he still wanted me on as his chief information security officer. There's no doubt in my mind that this individual will be able to do something similar, provided he's learned the reality of value, that no matter how much money you gather, there's nothing that will ever be more valuable than your reputation. Your reputation will always be more valuable. And I hope he has learned that, and I wish him the best of success in whatever he's doing.
I think that's very graceful of you. And, you've definitely found the kind of middle path there of balancing those things. And I guess it's one of those things that only time will tell how they take in those actions and whether the right path has been chosen. But moving on from the past of ShapeShift, let's talk about the way it's moved forward. So could you talk to me a little bit about ShapeShift becoming a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization? So off the top of the thing, we're going to have to explain what a DAO is. So maybe you could jump in with what's a DAO and why did ShapeShift want to become one?
Yeah, this is a fascinating story. So a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, is the name that you give to a bunch of people that are working together on something without any other formal alignment. Normally there are companies, or there's hierarchical structures within a company. You've got the CEO, you've got the intern at the bottom. With a DAO, it's just a bunch of people that like doing something together. You can think of it as your tennis club, but even a tennis club is a little bit more formal because, like, we will call this a tennis club, and now you are a member, you are not a member. With a DAO, it's just loose. If you want to contribute, you can. If you don't want to contribute, just ignore it. Now, Dows are Dows have been working in the cryptocurrency space for a while, and they each created many great things. There are a lot of really fascinating systems that were put together by Dows. Some guy says, hey, I want to be a developer and build this thing. Some girl says, hey, that's a really cool thing. I want to talk about it on my podcast and, do marketing. And some other person says, hey, you should partner with so-and-so. I'll put the two of you in touch. And, people become de facto business development people or developers or what would be formal roles in other companies. And before you know it, they've achieved something in a month span that a formal company may take a full year to pull off. And ShapeShift, the company, was it was a platform for people to access their crypto. You plug in your keys, you could see your balance, and from one web application, you can choose, I want to trade this for that. I want to sell this for cash. I want to move this to there. And while we were developing this with a centralized group of about, I think it was maybe 80 people at the time in Denver, we saw online all these DAOs, these groups of people shipping something like Uniswap, which was a way to swap one token for another, that was having volumes shooting through the roof. We were seeing a variety of other systems that were being so successful. And then when you look to add all the companies, Coinbase and Kraken and ShapeShift, we were snails by comparison. And it's like, okay, well, how are they moving so quickly? And we realized it was our own corporate structure that was holding us back. We were spending time on what companies spend time on. It's a quarterly HR review time. So managers, make sure that you spend time writing reviews for all of your direct reports. It's compensation review time. Justify to your managers why you feel that you do or do not deserve the increased pay. And just dealing with all of the stuff that a corporation needs to deal with, we were spending a fraction of our time actually building and actually shipping. Whereas those DAOs, it's like 100%, they're just working on the project because they love the project. So when we realized that we were the ones holding ourselves back by comparison, the choice was clear. We should decentralize ourselves out of existence. So that's what ShapeShift began doing. We started preparing in January of I think it's 2021 or 2022 when we did it, 2021. We started preparing in January and we announced it to the world in June. And we open sourced all of our code. We created a brand new token, the Fox token, that would give people voting rights. Within a DAO, because there's no leader, you still need to have some way of governing each other. And that's done through the votes with the Fox token. We did, at the time, it was the largest airdrop in the world. We just gave out Fox tokens to everybody who had ever used any of these DAOs. We looked at all the different DAOs that were out there. We saw the users of the DAOs, and we just blasted free Fox tokens to everybody. No cost, just here. They're now all yours. Because you've been doing something like this with other communities, we're starting a new community, and maybe you want to be involved. And now anybody who wants to do work for the DAO, they make a proposal. They say, hey, I think this feature should be done to add this capability to the ShapeShift web app. Somebody else says, oh, I can do that, but it'll cost me maybe 8 hours of my dev time, and my rate is X an hour. So if you give me so many dollars, I will code that feature for you. And someone says, yeah, I'll pay for that. Votes come in, and if the majority is yes votes out of all the Fox tokens that voted, well, that guy's going to get his $2,000 and he will ship the code. If he takes it and leaves and doesn't actually deliver, well, he'll never get approval on a proposal again. And there may be strings attached, like, okay, the money will be streamed to you upon successful delivery over the next 3 months. You will slowly get it over the next 3 months. sorry, my explanation is sort of darting around to a couple of different concepts, but there's governance with the Fox votes. There are proposals that anybody can make. Everybody will vote on the proposals, yay or nay, depending on what you think. And in aggregate, as long as there are enough tokens that voted, if there's a quorum, which I believe is around 4 million tokens total, as long as at least 4 million vote, then it'll either pass or fail. And you look at the quantity, and if there are more yeses than nos, then it passes. And through this process, people will be elected for a small term for a position. Somebody will be in charge of engineering for the next 4 months. And if they do a good job, they may put up a new proposal, hire me for another 4 months. People may vote it down because you kind of sucked at your job, bud, or that's amazing. We want you, we'll give you even more money to continue doing what you want. These people are given a budget, and they have the authority to distribute that budget however they like. For a period of time, I was one of these leaders in the ShapeShift DAO. I was given a budget of $300,000 to build a new decentralized data backend. And I'm happy to say that it's going to be launching within the next month or so. It's a little bit difficult for an individual who's used to receiving a paycheck every 2 weeks to wrap their head around this. But these DAOs successfully employ many individuals. And once the individual gets the gets their hands on how to move these tokens around, convert them into dollars in their bank account so they can pay their rent and pay their groceries, it's actually not that difficult.
I mean, it sounds like a fantastic system where you can move faster. It's kind of a meritocracy. But I assume there are some challenges as well. So you mentioned you've got to get, at least that 4 million. What happens if people votes? Yeah, if people aren't engaging with the process, they're just abstaining from voting. They've just lost interest and have drifted off, but they still, have a voting. They have the coins to vote with, or tokens.
If a proposal doesn't get that quorum, then the proposal doesn't pass. And there is a fine line between voter apathy. If you ask these voters to vote on so many things so often, they're just going to get annoyed and they may not show up tomorrow. But if you don't get enough of these votes, it looks like the community is stagnating and they're not actually moving forward. There is one community member who acts as sort of the corraller, as I guess sort of like a lobbyist that you would see in government, running around door to door saying, hey, did you see that proposal? You should really vote yes or no. I would encourage you to vote yes, because here's why I think this is important. And these types of people acting in these capacities, they earn their income through doing that. One of my former coworkers and good friends at ShapeShift, Tyler, he has created a completely new role out of the DAO for himself. Once a week, he runs a meeting where they discuss all the proposals to date. They bring people up on stage to say, hey, why did you ask this proposal? Who disagrees with it? Let's bring them on stage and hear what they have to say. And he runs a forum, essentially, a voice forum where people discuss these, and he earns his income by doing this.
And in terms of some of the other challenges you might face, I'm imagining that, in some traditional scenarios, you have a business, you have a CISO, you have a CFO, you have then people in like the finance industry and government getting interested in regulation and know your customer checks and all these kind of things. How does that work with a DAO where it's decentralized?
Great question. So all rules and all laws apply to the people that are doing the activities that they apply to. When it comes to something like regulated activity, like trading with customers, it is the entity that is trading with customers that needs to follow all of those regulations. ShapeShift itself doesn't do any trades. So ShapeShift doesn't need to follow the laws that companies that do trade need to follow. But ShapeShift does partner with other entities to effect those trades. So people may use the ShapeShift web application, which shows them their balance. But when they click the trade button, they're not trading with ShapeShift. They go off to some other system and they trade there. It's up to that other system to impose those KYC laws and regulations that are pertinent for that jurisdiction. This isn't by stitching together multiple separate systems and having each individual system account for what it's responsible for. It simplifies things greatly, even though on the surface it looks like it's actually a lot more difficult.
And in some cases, I've seen people talk about the fact that they think there should still be some form of hierarchy. And they start talking about decentralized hierarchies, which seems an interesting concept for me. What's your thoughts around DAOs versus decentralized hierarchies?
For whatever reason, humans are built to have leaders and followers. It's a story as old as time. And unless you have somebody beating that drum at the front of the crowd, nobody else really knows how to march together. One way that DAOs solve for this is they're called different things in different DAOs. In the ShapeShift DAO, they're called workstream leaders, WLs. They were analogous to the chief security officer, the chief marketing officer, chief engineering. They are the ones who are appointed for a period of time to lead engineering. They're the ones who beat the drum for their team. They say, hey, our priority should be focusing on this next. I want you guys to do this. Here are the 30 tasks that need to happen. So they'll build out the task list into bite-sized chunks of work. They will distribute them to any of the contractors who want to contribute. They'll collect the final work product, review it, make sure it's good, and merge it in. So for them, it is like like mini hierarchies. But the differences are you can vote out your boss if you think he's doing a crappy job. And I'm sure many of your listeners have been in a situation where you have someone on your team that everyone clearly knows they're not pulling their weight, but you can't touch them because of this or that or the other, or like, well, what can you say about your boss other than going above your boss to his boss and complain? But now that puts you at risk because depending on their relationship, you now may find yourself on the outskirts. But what if there was a system where, every 4 months the company gets together and everybody votes, and those votes could actually unseat the cruft that is holding the team back and replace them with somebody else who can move the team forward. That is where I think DAOs become very valuable. Fully decentralized versions where there's no leadership, I think works against our own human nature. We love following good leaders, and good leaders inspire us to do things that we alone wouldn't be able to do ourselves. Or even if you add up the sum of all of the people on the team, a leader can squeeze more juice out of that that lime than the sum of all the parts, because they inspire and they encourage you to do more than you otherwise would have done without that encouragement. So that's sort of where I see leaders and DAOs.
I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating concept to look at, and I'm sure everyone listening has probably worked in an organization where they've suffered through those things you were talking about, or wished they could move faster with things, or have seen individual contributors just working on projects accelerating far beyond what they can do as a kind of organized and scrum team and agile and all these things we wrap around things to try and improve process that often just end up slowing us down and dragging us down. So we're nearly out of time today, so we could spend, I think, another hour talking about DAOs and beyond. So we should probably just move on. Before we close out, one of the things I've got to ask you about is I come from the world of kind of security research and running malware labs. And one of the things we come up against time and time again is a perception of associating Bitcoin and cryptocurrency with the rise of ransomware. What would you say to someone who blames cryptocurrencies for the rise of ransomware and ransomware attacks in general?
I guess the first thing I would note is that ransomware existed long before cryptocurrencies ever existed. So to blame the medium of exchange rather than blaming the actors that are performing these attacks, I think is sort of missing the forest for the trees. People have always dealt with things that are valuable, whether it was dollars yesterday, credit cards, or cryptocurrency. The reason why it's valuable to you and me is the reason why it's valuable to these attackers. Early forms of ransomware would take credit card payments that would be siphoned through and bounce around, landing in the attacker's hands. You don't blame Visa for the attacks of an attacker. You don't blame grandma because she lost US dollars when a thief mugged her. You blame the thief. So it's no surprise that that thieves change the medium that they're using to receive their value, and they're going to change it again tomorrow when there's something that's even more convenient to them. If anything, the fact that thieves are using cryptocurrency just shows you the value of cryptocurrency. I know a lot of people, and potentially some of your listeners, may be very critical of cryptocurrency and believe that it is valueless, worthless cruft that's just wasting energy around the world. I would obviously disagree with them. But the whole point of these decentralized systems is that you can interact with another human without requiring a middleman between you. And this is a new paradigm that has never existed in all of humanity's history. Always, whenever two people are dealing with each other, they would either need to be face-to-face or there would have to be a middleman involved, whether it was the money changers in biblical times to the PayPals or Western Unions in more modern times. There always has to be someone in the middle that both of you need to trust to affect the transaction. And that middleman, they not only take fees from both sides, which is their right for the service that they're providing, but they also have the ability to alter the transactions. They can withhold funds. They can choose to delay funds for any number of reasons, whether it be politically motivated, greed motivated, or just, I don't like you, so I'm going to not allow you to transfer your thing. With cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, the value is transferred from me to you, and there is no middleman that takes a cut. There is no middleman that can stop it for any reason, politically motivated or otherwise. You can put a gun to a banker's head and tell him, edit the ledger and give me $1 million. And if he has the authorization, he is able to do it. But Bitcoin runs on math. You can put as many guns as you want to math, and 1 + 1 will always be 2. And you don't need to trust any individual to abide by any agreement. The only thing you need to trust is that math will always be math. And that's the true power of cryptocurrency. Whether it be used by Mother Teresa to feed orphanages, or it's being used by the world's worst terrorist, the medium of exchange cannot be blamed for the actions of men.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting things that, the reasons that, when people talk about the traditional banking system and money is stolen, and it can then be, if it's traced, it can be taken back. But the fact that it can be taken back means that someone outside of those two people who did the initial transaction has the ability to do that thing, like you say, put the gun to someone's head. But with the Bitcoin and other technologies like that, you can't do that. And there's also that level of transparency, like you said earlier, that if it's on the ledger, it's always going to be on the ledger. That means that as an investigator, you can try and follow the trail. It also means if you're a threat actor, you can see. So the recent case with the US healthcare provider who was hit, there's been some transactions. You can go in and look at the wallet that's associated with a threat actor where 350 Bitcoins were paid in recently, things like that, where you can see things. So on one side, you can say it's incentivizing other threat actors because those payments are very transparent and other people can see the money that's there to be made. But on the other side, so can the investigators and law enforcement. And it's kind of up to them. So it's very interesting kind of double-edged sword thing going on there.
Yeah, I remember when I was working at Rogers Communications, there were a number of investigations where employees were stealing money and they would transfer it to Royal Bank of Canada. to an account at Royal Bank of Canada, and we would work with lawyers to get subpoenas and demand the records for the bank. And it would take weeks or a month, and we'd finally get the records for that one account. And we see that as soon as the money entered this account at Royal Bank, it was forwarded on to the Toronto Dominion Bank. Okay, well now we need to go another round of lawyers and subpoenas and everything to get the records for this one TD Bank account, only to see that now it's being forwarded to another one at Scotia. And these opaque ledgers would stymie investigation after investigation. Meanwhile, these criminals are doing God knows what with their ill-gotten gains. But on these public blockchains, anyone, an armchair investigator or a professional investigator, can see it went from here to here, then it went from there to there, and then, it looks like they sold it from Bitcoin and they purchased Ether with it. Okay, well, now this Ether is there. Where did that Ether go? And you can follow it all the way, and then and now they're trying to cash it out at Coinbase. Coinbase is where is where they are now. Like the speed of these investigations is light years ahead of what we used to be able to do with banks. And this always makes me chuckle when I see politicians get up front and saying like, criminals are laundering funds with cryptocurrency. Well, laundering implies concealment, and everything is public. Like the criminal moved it there. It's right there. I can see it right there. Like that, it's not laundering. And if anything, it is far easier for all of us to trace when it's on these public blockchains than these opaque banks. So they seem to have lost the plot when it comes to their understanding of cryptocurrencies.
So before we round out the interview today, one thing I wanted to go back to was that epiphany you had when you were throwing rocks at Bitcoin in the early days, trying to work out how to prove it was a scam. And then you had that moment where you suddenly realized this has huge potential. Of that huge potential that you saw at the time, what is it that you think hasn't come to fruition yet? What is it you're hoping that we'll see in the future that we're missing today?
Biggest thing that we're missing today is adoption. And that's a double-edged sword. There's two different sides to it. One side is the technology. This version of Bitcoin that we're using, these versions of cryptocurrencies that we're using, they cannot keep up with the scale of transactions that all humans do around the world. When you compare how many transactions per second that the Visa network secures versus the amount of transactions per second that, let's say, Bitcoin or even all cryptocurrencies all combined, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the whole. And in order for these networks to do all the transactions that mankind needs, technological scaling solutions need to be completed. There are a variety of technological scaling solutions that are being built right now on a lot of different networks, and I'm here for every single one of them. They're all taking a slightly different approach at building these, but the end game is going to be a network that will be able to have the same trustless properties, but with the scale that is global, or maybe even solar system universal. Who knows? The other side of adoption is education. Just like in the early days of computers, most people don't even understand what it really does or why they would want to use it in their daily lives. You ask people about cryptocurrencies and they may say like, oh, it's that scammy thing that drug dealers use. And ironically, they're not talking about the US dollar. It's going to take a lot of education to train people on how to use these private keys and have them as comfortable using a private key as using a password. We finally just got to a point in the use of computers some 30 years later that using your birthday for a password is not okay. Using your mother's maiden name is not a good password. Anybody growing up with passwords today knows these types of rules. Tomorrow, it's my hope that people will be as comfortable with private keys as they are with passwords today. It'll be common to have these password stores on your device, on your phone, on your computer, and actually pass keys, which is a new technology being pushed by a lot of the the big tech companies, these pass keys are essentially cryptocurrency keys, just with a different name and a different wrapper. And where these pass keys are being used to access websites, it'll be very similar to how cryptocurrency keys are used to access funds. So yeah, between education and between working on the technological problems that will enable scaling, those are the things that excite me, because I see a world in our future where we use blockchain networks as ubiquitously as computer networks. And we don't really think about the internet packets that are being sent over TCP/IP, and we shouldn't need to think about the UTXOs and a Bitcoin transaction and coin control and all these the technical nerdy stuff. Even though for nerds it's really cool how it works under the hood, the average user doesn't need to know or care about it. They just want to send value to their brother on the other side of the globe and know that it reached him.
That is fantastic and a really interesting sort of look forward to what we could be getting into, and actually are increasingly, like you say, are getting into with the use of the keys and everything else there. Obviously, we've covered a lot of interesting ground today, lots of topics that you can deep dive on some more. So if people are interested in finding out more about you, the work you do, or some of the topics we've talked about, where would you recommend they go look you up online?
So you can follow me on Twitter at mperklin. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you need help with something. But if you want to get started with your decentralized journey, ShapeShift is a free front end that you can use to access your crypto, regardless of what crypto it is. And the Archeo network is the decentralized data network that I'm building. You can follow that at archeo.network.
Well, that's great. And thank you very much today to our guest, Michael Perklin, for helping us dive into the world of decentralization, DAOs, cryptocurrencies, and blockchains. I'm sure that, like most of our listeners, I now have far more questions about this topic than I started with. It's absolutely fascinating. Such huge potential, not only for the way we do think about finance today, the way we think about, security, the way we think about sharing information and securing things. So lots of interesting food for thought there. As always, thanks to super producer Ben Supercuts Kramer and the team at Beyond Trust who make this happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.